and I will introduce our second featured reader, Kris Johnson, who grew up in America's Puget Sound. I hope I say that right. Puget Sound Basin. Okay, I'm really messing this up, but and moved to the UK in 2007. She is the recipient of a DYCP grant from Arts Council England and has published in journals including the Poetry Review, Poetry Island Review, Poetry London, and Poetry Wales. Her debut pamphlet, Skinny Dip, was published in 2022 by Enchiridion. Her first book-length collection, Ghost River, was published by Blood Axe in 2023 and longlisted for the Laurel Prize. And of course, Kris, I also have a reflection about your work. America is nothing if not longing, it says in your poem Northwest Passage. And that longing, that love, breaks out of every poem. And these are also poems that love what is dangerous to love. For instance, a mountain that might kill a man, if only because it is in their nature to collide. One is fixed and unmoved, the other movable and eager to conquer. These are poems that are rightly in awe of the sublime, something so magnificent it escapes or grasps, and something that is as perilous as it is overwhelming. This is a poetry that grounds the sublime in itself firmly in the natural world, and it's therefore also a fluid kind of poetry as well, flowing easily from birth to tectonics, from prayer to rugged myth, taking us back to the core, the land we spring from, and the mystery that lies underneath. And Kris, of course, for you as well, how has poetry shaped your world?
Gosh, I wish I could describe my own work that well. That's such a beautiful reading of it. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me along. How has poetry shaped my world? It's an interesting question. I was thinking about it when it came through this morning, your question, and gosh, it totally reshaped it, I think. It used to be something that was just purely a sort of an inward life. And I love that sort of that communing with yourself or with the world around you, but in a very private way. But then I thought, oh, I should study this thing further. So I came to the UK to do a master's and then never left. And so it's strange for me because it's the thing that took me away from the thing that I love. But then it's sort of over time has given that back to me because I think about and I see home in a completely different way now that I live further away from it. And so in that sense, it's sort of like I have this double vision when it comes to what home is or what it feels like to be home. And it's also strange because I ended up marrying a poet. So I lost sort of one family through poetry and gained another, which is quite bizarre. But it's yeah, it's an interesting thing, poetry, and it's I suppose it's a bridge, it's a connection, and I don't know, being published by Blood Axe, it kind of feels like you're being brought into a family. And there's something about that I really love. I love being part of that family, part of that community of voices. So yeah, I guess that poetry rocked my world. It reformed it completely.
That's a wonderful take.
Good
Well,
question.
yeah, well, thanks for this amazing answer, and I now invite you to rock our world with your poetry.
Well, thank you. There will be some rocks in it, so that's a start. But anyway, it's so hard to follow you, Marjorie. Your poems are amazing. I just have to say before I launch into it. So it's a real pleasure to be reading with you tonight and to reading to all of you. Thanks so much for coming out. Rainier. And I should say, of course, I'm not going to read any poems from the central sequence, but it's about George Vancouver, who was a British explorer who came and was in search of a Northwest Passage, but also claiming territory for Britain and in the process naming everything he saw. So the names like Rainier and Puget Sound come from him and are named after the men, either sort of famous men back in Britain or men aboard his ship, which is, you know, something we're all wrestling with and trying to undo. But Rainier. I'm in love with this mountain that all summer long threatens to kill my father. Swallow him in the pale blue emmons, crush him beneath an avalanche, or send him sliding down the Couts, his crampons failing on pre-dawn ice. This mountain I love will one day knock on the door of my mother's home, unearth the graves of my relatives, and carry hyacinths and coffins down the Duwamish out into the Sound. I often think of this as being quite a watery book, but I think it's maybe a book of sort of water and fire, living, on the Pacific Rim in sort of the Ring of Fire. It's that sort of that meeting of those two forces. So I'll read some watery poems and then I'll read some fiery poems. And it seems impossible, of course, to think about the West now without thinking about fire, without thinking about wildfires, and just the destruction of that. But we'll move from water to fire. Ghost River, the title poem, it has some footnotes, and I'm not going to read them out. I'll spare you that, but I'm really interested in scientific language and the language of sort of environmental policy and planning, and how we talk about these sort of places that we love. But the text comes from a document related to the aquifer that was under the town I grew up in, and it talks about both how they're going to try and protect and preserve it, but also periods of drought that were sort of established, well, that were emerging in the 80s and carry on till now, of course. So Ghost River. Aquifer, noun, a sung prayer which uses liturgical text by the Italian Dominican theologian and philosopher Thomas Aquinas. What is faith, if not the belief in water we cannot see? We drink from the hosepipe a mouthful of darkness. So that's what the center of the earth tastes like. Aquifer, noun, a subterranean repository. Beneath the homestead of my ancestors, the time-blackened sauna and fruit trees, the apartment complexes and strip mall, the DMV and high school, beneath the Kmart and the Walmart, Valley Highway and Dairy Queen, beneath the cornfields and the lettuce, cabbages and broccoli, beneath the fertilizer, pesticides, cattle pens and milk barn, beneath Salal and Douglas fir, cedar and mycelium, kissing the underbelly of Big Sus and Sawyer, there are ghost rivers from which we all drink. There is deeper water yet. Aquifer, verb, to repress or withhold. She will not drink. She dreams black water. Imagine a glass, half empty, half. What is data that deals in thirst, whose currency is water? Aquifer, noun, the malign shadow that sometimes appears in scans. We are told that our hearts should be glad, palm to palm with black water. She prays, holy, holy, holy. What shall I call her? Grandmother? Ghost River? Ghost River, grandmother, is it you I taste in this glass? Aquifer, verb, to gather the unconsolidated possessions of the deceased. What remains are gloves, cut glass necklaces, handkerchiefs, a clock, pantyhose. Aquifer, noun, the small font at the entrance or exit of a church. She said, come. Each unconsolidated sediment is welcome here. The sediments came and fell upon their knees to wash her feet. As we were chatting before we got started, I was saying that it was my daughter's birthday this week. And she's turning 6. But she was born before the pandemic. And so a word like corona didn't have the same significance then as it does now, of course. But try and imagine this poem in the absence of the coronavirus and just embrace the beautiful word corona. Corona. Her birth is light, or so I tell myself as I'm wheeled from bright room to bright room. Only here it is brighter because this is the room in which she is being born. Light because for days there has been no sleep. Light because she is cradled in my body like flame in a kerosene lamp. Light does not want to be alone. It seeks out dying stars, televisions, even this fluorescent room of masked faces. I was told that for her coronation, she would wear my body as a crown and I would know the white pain of light. Corona, because what else can light wear? But she is not crowning. Instead, she is rising, her body lifted, backlit by LEDs, her body glorious and blazing, her body rising as the sun must. I suppose birth and death, those big subjects are central to the book. The birth of my daughter, the death of my grandmothers. And it's an interesting thing writing because I think sometimes, like we were saying, it's the way you can reach out to something. And not being able to get home for my grandmother's funeral when she was dying at all, because of COVID, writing somehow helped me be able to reach to her or to reach to that place. And so this is my sort of my elusive Northwest Passage. Northwest Passage. My sister places a handful of my grandmother's ashes in a cedar box. On the box are horses. She dreams of horses, dreams of grandmother opening the box the way flames open a roof. I have seen trees erupt with manes of fire. I have seen hillsides gallop towards rivers. Stay a while. I would like us to ride horses the way I imagine my grandmother rode through the Young Valley. There are no freeways, no car lots. The drive-in is coming, but a long way off. If there is only one fence, it is easier to jump. Picture my grandmother as a horse without a rider, a horse black as her hair, black as the fossil in the spare room, unearthed as they blasted the hills to make way for the interstate. The smell of dynamite is in the air, and at the mouth of the tunnel she gallops through. If I am using you to delay the grief that I know is coming, what happens when we part? Imagine us cresting Chinook Pass to greet the dry breeze of Yakima County. The dark forests roll until dissolved by sage, beyond the sage, juniper, beyond the juniper grasses, and somewhere beyond the grasses, mountains and rivers and forests and mountains and rivers and... America is nothing if not longing. The valley a riparian marsh uninterrupted by the cornfields, the river snaking loose through the cattails, the call of the red-winged blackbird, the unwritten name of Umlaria cerasiformis. Too far back. Knowledge erases itself the way a tree may burn from the inside, leaving nothing more than a hollow trunk. I no longer know if I set out to write about arrivals or departures or why I assumed there was any difference. It doesn't matter if the clouds we kick up are dust or ash, or if it was with you that I ride, or if I am seated behind my grandmother in the old Ford and we are driving to where they drove the final spike of the Transcontinental Railroad. I see a bald field, and in the distance, two tracks merging. And I'll just close with one final poem. Thank you so much for listening, and thanks for coming out tonight. It's been a real pleasure. Tectonics. The argument had something to do with tectonic plates, the way they moved and how. But so much time spent working from memory means I have forgotten the point, and the subduction zone now has no name, but exists as a dropping off point, not far from where I may have looked once when waking to sea stacks crowned with mist and waves beating the shore, or here now at the front gate of a small brick nursery. A number of years ago, I watched two children put together a puzzle. I held one piece uncertain of when it became so difficult. If all new thinking is about loss, Perhaps that is why these part memories return as I let go of her hand. Our days together belonging now in a past that until yesterday was the present. I used to believe the purpose of life was movement. I crossed oceans, continents. I never stopped to consider the mountain's stillness, only its power, old earth rising as new. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kris. That was wonderful.